You see, something is going to happen. Something wonderful.
My God, it's full of stars.
Hey there, everyone. Welcome to the NY Patriot Show. Tonight, I do have, listen, if someone's co-hosting with me, odds are it's going to be Colby or Teresa. And tonight, I got my boy Colby, my other podcaster in crime, with me tonight, joining this episode. And we also got Philip Zozzaro joining us as well. I know most people probably already know who he is, but Colby, would you like to introduce yourself for the people who may not know who you are yet and let people know what you're about?
Yep. I'm about conspiracy and bullshit. My name's Colby, and I like to fuck around with news and current events and also dissect certain conspiracies. And conspiracyplaytime.com or disinfobation anywhere but YouTube and Apple are my two shows. Also, I do that with Dusty at YouTruthcast on Twitter, and he's probably watching right now, so I had to make sure I called him out by name.
That's fine. I was just thinking, I was like, yo, we got to get him on with us one time.
For sure. He'd love to.
Yeah, I'd love to have him on too. He's such a shit talker. Yeah, and
Yes.
your links will be in the bottom. I have your conspiracy playtime. I have that in the bottom. If there's any other links, I'll add them. But I think you said that was good enough, correct?
Yeah, I could send you the disinfobation for Rumble. I mean, that's kind of, it's either Rumble or Spotify for that one, typically, if people find it.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. And we are going to have Colby introduce the guest because he's the one who pulled them off tonight. So thank you very much, Colby. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so I heard this guy, Phil, Wealth of Knowledge. I heard him on a mutual friend, Jack Allen, Conspiracy or Just a Coincidence. It was probably, close to a year ago now, if I had to guess, where you went on there and talked about first Watergate, and then I think he had you on actually consecutive episodes, and I get to hear you talk about the mafia. But when you were actually on his show the first time, you mentioned being a fan of the Clinton body count topic, and so I have always wanted to cover that, so I reached out to you. You answered right away. We did a 4-hour-long interview. It actually ended up breaking up into 2 episodes. Go check that out, or anybody who hasn't looked into it. Phil knows his shit. I basically just found a arbitrary list, and we went through them, and I do believe Danny Casolaro, is it Casolaro or Casolaro? How do you say it?
Casolaro.
So Casolaro was on the list, and I don't necessarily think that the Clintons really had anything to do with it. But anyway, we did talk about him, and I did want to get Phil back on because it seems like he's pretty passionate about this topic. So here we are today. And I don't know, before we dive into it, NY, do you want to plug your shit for my listeners on my end of things too?
True.
And then we'll just fucking go into it.
Yes. I have the NY Patriot Show and the Occult Rejects. Actually, tell you the truth, I'll make the announcement, I guess, here. Because going forward, I was going to start announcing it. I'm going to be moving my show over to the Occult Rejects RSS feed on the podcast eventually. So I would highly suggest to just eventually start keeping an eye out for that. But I do have the NY Patriot Show, which, and the Occult Rejects. 2 totally different shows. I'm just going to move one over to the RSS feed. But, those are the 2 shows I have. Also on BitChute, Rumble, and there's a YouTube that has both shows on it. So thank you very much.
Yeah, it looks like Phil's frozen. I don't know if we lost him.
Oh, okay.
Can you hear us, Phil?
No. Oh, there he goes.
Oh,
there he goes. I was just getting ready to boot him.
Probably yes. My first beer. That's probably the reason why.
Oh.
All right. So, Phil, you want to just talk about, just to get going, what your interest in this topic was, how you came onto it?
So, it goes back to the 60 greatest conspiracies of all time. The book by Jonathan Benkin, and I forget who his co-writer is. But Benkin is the main writer. And it, in it was the 60 greatest conspiracies at that time that the 2 authors believed. And one had to deal with people who, I think it was called They Died Alone, something like that. And there was Marilyn Monroe. I want to say John Paul I, Wilhelm Reich, I believe. and Danny Casolaro. And I had heard, I think I had come across his story like once or twice on like a current affair, but I never heard his name. I just heard like the background to it, like an author or, writer working on like the story of a lifetime sort of thing, and then being found dead. And, you read, in the 60 Greatest Conspiracies, it's like 5 or 6 page entry. I mean, just kind of gives a quick breakdown of the case. And for the most part, I had seen it, on the internet every now and then, but never really delved into it until I'd heard about Jim Keith and Ken Thomas's book, The Octopus, The Secret Government and the Death of Danny Casolaro. And it's a good book. It's short. I mean, it's only like 200 pages. Jim Keith was already very well known in the conspiracy community, writing on UFOs and what was one of it, the Casebook on Alternative 3 and things like that. And Ken Thomas has written about parapolitics, and I think they had he had his own like conspiracy magazine. And Jim Keith, about 3 years after The Octopus came out, he dies in a very suspicious death. He falls at he was at Burning Man and fell off a stage and did damage to his knee. And during the operation, he dies of a blood clot develops and kills him. And, so that was a little bit of weirdness in and of, an offshoot of Danny Casolaro's death. So Danny Casolaro was a writer, he had connections. I think at one point they said he was a stringer for like the National Enquirer. He had written for some computer publications. He had also worked with Jack Anderson, the legendary Washington journalist. And there's even an interesting backstory with that during Watergate, this came out years later, Danny Casolaro thought that Jack Anderson had involvement with Watergate, like that his involvement was a little bit more involved. And Jack Anderson was the reporter that the plumbers at one point talked about putting LSD on his steering wheel, and we're talking maybe even killing him. Was another plan. And Anderson knew Frank Sturgis of the burglars, of the plumbers, I should say. So anyway, Danny Casolaro, just a writer. He'd written a book of poetry and written a novel that I think was published by I think they called it like a vanity press. You had to pay to get it published and then kind of go from there. Not saying anything on his writing, but you never know, especially back then. It was called The Ice King was the novel he wrote. And I've tried finding it. I think it goes for like a few $1,000s if you can find it. So let me go this way. So I'll give you this backstory of his death. So he's found in a Sheraton in Martinsburg, West Virginia, August 10th, 1991. I always kind of find that interesting because it was the day before as my youngest sister. That was the day she was born. So
I was born August 11th, so I was born the day after his death.
Wow. Yeah. Holy shit. So he's found in a Sheraton. He's found in a bathtub. A lot of blood in the room. They notice like weirdness of the fact there's towels that look like they tried to clean up where the blood was. They find like broken glass, an ashtray. They find a shoelace around his neck and a couple bags on the floor, looking like maybe he tried to, whatever. But then they also find like 12 slashes, 8 on one, 4 on the other. And
wasn't one of them so fucking deep that it got a tendon?
Yeah, it was deep. And this is a guy who did not cringed at the sight of blood, lost a sister to a drug overdose. Like there's already so many weird things if they wanted to look into it. And instead, what do? They give him over to the coroner and embalm him before they notify the family so they could do an autopsy. And his brother, Anthony, who later on actually became the team doctor for Washington's football team, and they'll always be the Redskins to me.
How dare you?
I'm sorry. They're always pathetic anyway. I like the Giants, but still. So when the brother found out, he was like, well, why did you embalm him? Well, apparently the coroner just couldn't, whoever they had brought him to said, I didn't want to come in on a Sunday. So like they embalmed him within the first 24 hours, which is illegal in that state. And so already you have the possibility that whatever was in his system has been flushed out. God only knows. So he had gone down to West Virginia to meet with the source. He was already working on this octopus story, had already kind of encapsulated so many different things. I mean, it started off with the theft of the Promise software from a company called Inslaw. And the Promise software was the prosecutorial like management information system. It was supposed to keep track of cases for the Justice Department. And this company Inslaw, run by a husband and wife, Bill and Nancy Hamilton, this was going to make them. Like, they had been working on this project for a few years. They had finally gotten it to like its, I guess, like its perfect product. Gave it, I guess they gave a copy to the Justice Department. And
Oops.
Yeah, it kind of went from there. Because next thing you know, the Justice Department cancels the contract. And within a few years, the Hamiltons find out that the Mounties have a copy of Promise. And like, you know, they're like, well, you didn't get it from us. There was a lot of strangeness right from the beginning with that. And that's, you know, I think Casolaro picked it up. I think it was in 1990 is when he started working on the case. And by meeting the Hamiltons, that's how I eventually meet somebody like Michael Riconosciuto, who's like an interesting guy in and of itself, who's, you know, basically like a genius, you know, but also involved in some sort of shady stuff. And eventually meets a guy named Robert Booth Nichols, who's could be even shadier than Riconosciuto from his connections. Robert Booth Nichols is actually connected to Steven Seagal in, strange. He's in the movie Under Siege. He's an extra in the movie Under Siege. And there's a lot of weirdness in and of itself with that. But so the contact Casolaro was meeting in Martinsburg worked for Hughes Aircraft. And there was a lot of, you know, like he was giving them, I think it had to do with Hughes Aircraft and their government contracts, and that there might have been some sort of malfeasance in that. They interviewed the guy who was apparently like completely frightened, which makes sense, a guy named William Turner. And he said he saw documents, because Casolaro used to like to show some of the stuff he was working on, and that he had stuff linking, I think it was Oliver North, to BCCI, the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, or as it was known, the Bank of Crooks and Criminals. Because
so you get the Iran-Contras tying into this right there?
Yeah, there's definitely Iran-Contra links to, I mean, in the end, some people were wondering, did Casolaro take on too much? But I think, you know, when you look at something the way this is, you know, you connect what happened with Inslaw and the Promise software, and you have some people who are connected with Reagan's, you know, inner circle. You know, this guy Earl Bryan, who was in Reagan's cabinet, Edwin Meese, who was the Attorney General. You know, you start just kind of building it up from there. And I think I remember reading that Earl Bryan might have been a point man for with the October surprise, you know, the
hostages.
Yeah, the hostages. Now, this year you just had that whole thing with, what was it? Ben Barnes from Texas, who was a former, I don't think he was a governor, he might have been a lieutenant governor, who said that he was privy to information that John Connally, who was the governor of Texas, he was the one who was shot behind Kennedy, and later on worked for the Nixon administration, that Connally was reaching out.
Oh, he earned that shit.
Yeah. Well, he wasn't supposed to be in that seat. That's something that came out later on, is that Connally wasn't supposed to be there. They wanted Connally with Johnson, and that they wanted this guy Ralph Yarborough, who was another senator but wasn't liked by Johnson. And like the reason why Kennedy was down there was to kind of squelch a Texas Democrat sort of argument, if you will, and that Yarborough was supposed to be in that seat instead. So who knows? I mean, in the end, they wanted Kennedy, but so anyway, yeah, there's connections where with this Promise software being stolen and kind of, you know, sent to other countries, that it might have been figured into the whole October surprise, because that's something that Casolaro would start looking into too, to the point where I think it became frustrating for him, like they were sort of connected, but they were also like, I think the October surprise, you had to deal with sort of these shady sort of go-betweens and gun runners. And, they kept, anytime the October surprise would come up, they'd be like, well, look at these guys, this guy's a gun runner and this one's this and this. And it's like, well, look at a mob trial. You're looking, if we're going on credibility, Sammy the Bull kills 19 guys. We're going to take his testimony and John Gotti, but you got a problem with the guy who kills 20, 21? It's like, it's a matter, if it's a matter of personal taste, obviously you wouldn't trust any one of them. But then again, look at the FBI agents who you're expecting to trust their testimony, and there's a good chance they probably just look the other way anyhow. But so Casolaro had come to rely on Michael Riconosciuto for information. And a lot of times he would bounce his leads off Robert Booth Nichols. And that started kind of causing issues in and of itself. I don't think Nichols and Riconosciuto knew each other, but I think there was a fact that Nichols didn't want Casolaro going to Riconosciuto at all. And Riconosciuto had said that he had actually worked on upgrades to Promise to turn it into something that we could sell it to friendly and unfriendly nations, and there was a back door installed. Like, this was no longer about looking into cases. This was about being a people tracker and a money tracker.
Yeah, so this was before the internet was used by the civilians, and it already looks like the shit the NSA is doing today. They were trying to do it back then with this software.
Yeah, I mean, it's insane. And Promise has popped up. I still remember reading, it was, I think, like right after 9/11, that they were suggesting that Robert Hansen, the FBI, the guy who turned out to be a spy for the Russians, may have sold copies of Promise to the Russians. And, one of the names that also pops up, I believe, also is Tim Osman, also known as Osama bin Laden, popping up with Promise. So, it's one of those things that can get out of hand in terms of trying to determine who, what, where, when. I kind of go more of the fact that the Israelis got hold of it. I mean, what was it? Unit 8200 was the group. And that was kind of like their, sort of their espionage, obviously it already was espionage, but a little bit more like in the cyber realm of things early on. And the name I saw was a guy named Rafi Eitan, which, interestingly enough, there's two of those guys in the Israeli Mossad. And because another one's the guy who caught Eichmann, caught Adolf Eichmann in South America. But yeah, this other guy, Rafi Eitan, was with Unit 8200. He went under an alias named Dr. Benjamin Orr and got access to Promise. I mean, I've heard Robert Maxwell's name.
Yeah,
about that he was shilling that software to others, and
he had a watery death too.
Yes, he did. In November 91. Yeah, 91 was they were getting rid of a few people in that year, but yeah, he what was it, off the Canary Islands, and the Lady Ghislaine, right off the Lady Ghislaine, he fell or pushed.
Tripped.
Hey, Mossad they were, what was it, 90? They whacked, Gerard Bull, the guy who was working on the Doomsday Gun for the Iraqis. They killed him in Brussels, which I think has been all but admitted to at this point. A guy who we worked with at one point, Canadian genius scientist. And then, yeah, you have, I don't know who else was in, I think 91 might have been John Tower. Also, the Texas senator, he dies. I think within a day, Hines, the one that John Kerry's wife, Teresa, that was her husband, was a senator. He dies. Like, they died within a day of each other, Hines and Tower.
And plane
crash, and I think a helicopter crash.
And the Clinton list too has a shitload of people from
I don't think
early 90s.
Tower, I think, if anything else, might have been connected to some stuff. I don't know about Hines, but I was.
Oh. Got a glitch.
Well. So, ladies and gentlemen, while we wait for Phil to return, there's a lot to unpack in here.
Yeah.
And I was like, when I interviewed him about the Clintons, I felt like I was needing to have a notebook out, but there he is.
Oh, he's back. He's back.
All right.
I'm so glad I didn't use my laptop because my laptop would suck. But you're
on your wife's laptop?
Yes, I am.
Yeah,
well, you remember the first time we tried doing the Clinton body map? It wasn't working.
Didn't even work. We had to completely redo it. But today you're good until you freeze, and it doesn't. It seems to be quite a big chunk of space between when it happens. So I think we're okay as long as Nick and I can just jump in and fill in when you do freeze up.
Yeah.
So I think we were the year 91 in Mossad.
Yeah,
but I don't remember where we were regarding.
I was talking. But let's go back to.
Oh, the helicopter crash and the plane crash. Those other people dying back
John
to back.
Tower and H.J. Hines. John Hines. Yeah, was a senator, and so was John. John Tower was a senator, and then he was a Secretary of Defense nominee, but I think he had enough skeletons in his closet that they pretty much put the kibosh on it between drinking and womanizing and other things like that. But he was also, I think he was a cleanup man for the Republicans. I think he helped publish the Tower Commission is what looked into Iran-Contra. That was kind of like the we've investigated ourselves and, found ourselves innocent sort of thing. And I think he kind of went along,
like the 9/11 Commission.
Yeah. Or the investigation into the original October surprise. They had.
So do you want to talk about that? Because I just said hostages for people who might not know what was going on, like with the Carter administration and all that.
Oh, sure. So, you have, what was it, November 1979, you had the embassy in Iran was overrun. This is after the Shah's already been deposed and Khomeini comes in, and you have a little bit more of the religious fundamentalism taking hold in Iran. And I believe it was 50 plus hostages. I think it was over 400 plus days. Carter couldn't get them out. They tried the Desert One rescue that ended in a helicopter crash that killed, I think, over a dozen. They were all working, like at one point it was Carter's campaign was working on trying to get them out, the hostages out. Reagan's campaign was looking into it, and even the third party candidate was looking into it. And at some point, the day, when it is always dicey. I believe, they've always kind of held it out between like midsummer to like early fall 1980 that a deal was made. And the issue was it Madrid or Paris where these meetings took place? But the people who always figured into it were Bill Casey, the CIA director. I mean, he wasn't CIA at the time. He was Reagan's campaign chairman. And another Long Island connection. They have one of the places at Malloy College in Rockville Center is named after Bill Casey. And George H.W. Bush is figuring in on these meetings with some Iranian middlemen. And it was, almost kind of like the 1968 alleged October surprise with Nixon's campaign in Vietnam. And, you'll get a better deal when we come in. And so a deal was allegedly cut to keep the hostages until Reagan got inaugurated, and that we would ship, a shit ton of weapons to Iran. Like we would make it worth their while. And, the whole issue became later, oh, no, Casey couldn't have been here. He was at some sort of like, I think it was like some sort of World War II or like some sort of like Navy, like some sort of like reunion symposium that was in like London, but he had a day or almost a day where he was unaccounted for, that he could have went to these meetings. And same thing with George H.W. Bush, the guy who could never really pinpoint where he was on November 22nd, 1963, is kind of dicey on where he was. And he's like, oh, I was having breakfast with the guy, Potter Stewart, who was a Supreme Court justice. And they were like, no, you weren't. Stewart was here. Okay, well, I was doing this. Like, you can never really pinpoint them, but no one wanted to ask the probing questions for the most part, except the guy like the late Robert Parry with Consortium News. He was one of the few guys who really like pushed.
He was like the Peter Doozy of his time.
Yeah, well, Robert Parry worked for like Newsweek, and he broke a lot of Iran-Contra stories. He actually, I think he influenced Gary Webb's work. And he actually, after Gary Webb died, him and his sons posted, I got one of the books about Gary Webb's work before the Dark Alliance series. But Parry was like on a lot of that. And he's like, yeah, you're going to run into guys who are shady, gun runners and pilots and this and that. And he's like, but if they can tell you and they're, certain things add up, you kind of have to believe them, or at least go more than just say we're going to disregard the story. The October Surprise Report came out, I think around the time, not that long after Clinton got in, and nothing happened because they basically said, oh, it's debunked. And one of the guys, I believe, was Lee Hamilton, who was on the 9/11 Commission. I think he was one of the chairmen. It was Lee Hamilton and Tom Keene. So I think Hamilton and Keene might have been on that commission too, because later on they were like, oh, if we had been given this information, it's like, well, it was in your files. You just didn't look. There's a lot of validity, I believe, to the October Surprise. And I believe they did cut a deal. And the fact that the Iranians still released the hostages on Inauguration Day, 1981. So, it was a slap in Carter's face and cost Carter the election. If he got the hostages, I think he probably would have won, but it still would have been damn close because, the country was still pretty messed up too. Economically, we were kind of in the shitter at that point. And I think Reagan did offer something new, but, instead we got 8 years of, stuff that would lead to the savings and loan, collapse and Iran-Contra and, the drugs, MENA. So many fun things out of that came from, big government is the problem. That line that Reagan gave.
She should have just said, and I'm here to bring it in.
Yeah.
I'm not much into politics really, or know it that well, but from kind of conspiracy theorists that I have seen, I have no idea if they're even correct, but I've heard people say that Carter kind of even, they say oh, he really didn't do much and he was only there for 4 years. But I've seen some people when they start talking about politics and all these little things that he really kind of set up the country to actually turn to shit. He
didn't help. And at one point, what was it?
It's almost is that what we're getting now with Biden?
Yeah.
He's not really doing much, but just setting it up to turn into more shit.
And
we're only going to have him for probably 4 years. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, probably. Absolutely. I don't think physically, it's going to be hard to keep up that.
Well, and the DNC's turning on him. So
that's why I'm just saying he's definitely not. Because I'm even seeing liberal news say they don't think he should be running, and I'm like, oh, well, he won't be winning if the news already said he shouldn't be.
Yeah, pretty much. Because we can see how much the news. The way not even
for the left. I'm saying if they're already shitting on their side, you already know that person's done.
Yeah, it's going to be a hard walk up the slide on that one. With Carter at one point, his chief of staff, he hadn't been his chief of staff yet, but Hamilton Jordan, who was one of his
the Coke guy.
Yeah, one of his younger guys, but one of the Atlanta guys said, if we have so and so many trilaterals around, we failed. In his administration, and then his office was surrounded by people who were on the Trilateral Commission. And, Jordan would have problems later on because someone would try saying he did coke at Studio 54, which led to one of the first independent counsel investigations. And
Carter was being soft on drugs at the time. He was going to legalize marijuana federally. Yeah. He was pushing, and then that happened, and he had to pull back on all that stuff he was going to do.
Well, one of the guys who figures into a Carter issue was his chief of the Office of Management and Budget, a guy named Burt Lance, who was with him from the Georgia days. And Burt Lance would get involved in a company that would eventually be involved with BCCI. I think it was called First General Bank Shares. And his connection to that caused enough a conflict of interest issue, and whether I think maybe he had taken money that he shouldn't have led to him resigning. But later on, Lance would be whose name would come up with BCCI, and BCCI, a couple of guys in the United States who were kind of point people that Danny Casolaro would focus on were Clark Clifford, who was like a huge power broker in Washington from like Truman through.
Whoa, old fucker.
Yeah, Truman through Bush. Well, he was LBJ's last. He was the Secretary of Defense after Robert McNamara.
Oh, no kidding. And what a time to step into that role.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. What's the name? I think one of the movies they had at HBO movie, what's the name? Donald Sutherland played Clifford. And so by the time he was in the BCCI days, you know, he was getting on in years, but, you know, what they knew about this, you know, this almost an octopus in and of itself of, you know, banking branches that are involved in money laundering, possible drug trafficking, possible human trafficking, all these issues, funding warlords and all these things. And he's like, well, I don't know, I'm just a Washington lawyer, you know?
That's it. I haven't seen anything.
It's like the old SNL sketch with unfrozen caveman lawyer. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm just a caveman. Your new ways confuse me. You know, like these guys can just come in and be like, I didn't know the entire time. You have no idea this shit's going on. You know, I think when you're in DC long enough, you really truly believe that no one will believe anything bad about you, that you're covered in Teflon, like you're John Gotti back, you know, when you're rigging every trial, but you're like, look, hey, I got off. And it's like, yeah, if you're paying everybody, you're going to be Teflon, you know, but I think Carter, just going back to the thing about Carter, yeah, I think he almost was set up to fail. Like, I think they disabused him of any notion he was actually going to change anything. But then, yeah, having a guy like Brzezinski as your national security advisor, who's getting you into, you know, the Afghanistan shit show. And then we say, oh, we didn't, you know, like, oh, we got to stop the Russians. The Russians invaded Afghanistan. Yeah, no, we poked that bear until it happened. And then we're like, oh, yeah, we didn't know. You know, I said, it's insane. I just, I think it was last year, 2 years ago, I'd read the book about Carter, guy Kay Bird, who wrote the book about Oppenheimer that's being made into that movie that's coming out later this year.
Oh, the Christopher Nolan movie.
Yeah. American Prometheus was the name of the book, but the book about Carter, I forget the exact title, but it was a good book, but it makes you aggravated because you're like, you're the president and you can't run roughshod over your guys who are serving you. Like, I mean, that's why I always have issues with people who talk about, oh, Trump and no, that's exactly
what I was fucking thinking.
I said, you can't, because my parents, I have family are really big into Trump. And I said, he said the vaccines were okay. I said, he helped shut down the country. I said, you can't.
He didn't fire Fauci.
Yeah, didn't fire Fauci. I mean, come on. You let a guy like John Bolton, you let a guy like that back in? Like, come on. You can't do that. You really can't.
You know, that was like some of the stuff that, like, I mean, just not even going by like QAnon bullshit. Like, if I was just like following politics, like before it got to like the actual election, I was already starting to like really question him a lot himself. I was like, you know, I don't think he just seemed to make it look like he couldn't do anything about anything.
Trump?
Because he did nothing about anything that was going on.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It was just like, oh, well, when they ask, I'll send, people over for help. It was just like, I don't know. It was like, couldn't he just get rid of these people?
Yeah.
The swamp is
what and I'm like, and he's not draining it, and he's letting them fucking talk. He's standing right next to him.
Fucking John Bolton in. Pompeo. Bill Barr. Yeah. I mean, Steve Bannon actually, in hindsight, might have been like the best friend he had in that group. And he got rid of him pretty much first.
And Flynn, I don't think Flynn would have been I think if they didn't nail Flynn for, in the end, a phone call that really wasn't that bad, I'm like, Flynn probably would have been a good national security advisor. Instead, he had him for like a week.
Flynn, fucking PSYOP king over there, too. Yeah, talking about, who was that lawyer, Bill Burr, you just mentioned before?
Oh, Bill Barr?
Bill Barr, yeah. I'm sure you guys both, this is real quick. I know this is totally off the topic now, but I'm sure you both have heard of the Franklin scandal, right?
Oh, God, yeah.
There was that one.
YouTube took my fucking Franklin scandal episode down after a year and a half.
Oh, wow.
Up. That means you guys should go watch it. You can find it at our website, conspiracyplaytime.com.
I think that might have gave us a problem when we covered that too, believe it or not. With
It's
YouTube.
weird, dude. YouTube will not let you talk shit about Franklin scandal.
Yeah, it's dark.
Well, with that, no, was it? Yeah, the Franklin scandal. Yeah, that was the one with with like Aquino supposedly and all that other shit. There was a senator at some point that was like actually kind of thinking like something's going on here, and he actually even sent stuff to him then. He was actually in the position to be investigating pedophile shit. He was in the same position practically that he was in that Trump had him in then. And he's like, nope, nothing to see here.
Yeah.
Just like he did when everybody thought he was going to be the guy to bust all the pedos for Trump. No, nothing to see here again.
Directly tied to like bringing Epstein into the circle, like so. It runs in the
I think the guy's put in the position just to say there's nothing to see here.
Right.
Well,
right.
and see with Bill Barr, so I think I'd first come across him something to do with Pan Am. That he was the AG when Pan Am 103 happened, and of course that case is tons of weird shit, and I think that even pops up in Danny Casolaro's work too, whether that was a drug sting or something that went wrong. And we always threw, what was it, the Libyans, and it could have been the Syrians that were involved, like just weird aspects. I mean, you had a CIA guy on that plane, and possible whistleblowers and whatnot. But I'm trying to remember. With Barr, I had read a book called Compromised that was about the MENA, Contra training and drug running. And Terry Reid, who was a Contra pilot and a Vietnam vet who was in Arkansas, said he knew Bill Barr and was shocked when he found out, like, he knew him as another name. I think it was like Robert Johnson or Johnston. And it was an alias, just like Oliver North. Oliver North's alias was John Cathy. And later on, he was like, he gets introduced to these guys when they're
Cathy was his alter ego.
Yeah, and well,
that's where the stilettos come out.
That's what he was just dressed up at in the Franklin scandal.
One of the
up in those hotel rooms.
One of the craziest stories with that in that book, because they tried to put Reid in prison, was it's right after Barry Seal gets killed, and they meet at a bunker in, like, I think it's like an army bunker, something like that, in Arkansas, and it's Bill Clinton, one of Clinton's advisors, a guy named Bob Nash, who ran the Arkansas Development Finance Authority, which was like the piggy bank that funded state projects, Oliver North, Bill Barr, Terry Reid, and a guy named Max Gomez, also known as Felix Rodriguez. Felix Rodriguez is like hardcore CIA. He was supposedly the last guy who saw Che Guevara alive.
Did he cut off his hands?
I think they said he kept his hand, like something.
Yeah, I remember about that.
Yeah, and because in his book, his autobiography, there's a picture of him with George H.W. Bush, and they're all buddy. And but at that meeting, the Arkansas boys were, questioned on if they were skimming off the top. And then, at one point they're like, "Oh, it's a shame about what happened to Barry. You know anything?" No, I don't know anything. Like nobody knows anything.
Skimming cash or coke?
Skimming with the cash.
Okay.
Yeah, basically saying that they knew that Clinton and, that Clinton was being kind of piggy about it. So not a surprise. But yeah, that Barr was there and Barr was calling the shots.
Clinton was skimming the coke.
A little bit of both. I wouldn't be surprised. But so with Danny Casolaro's investigation, you go from the Promise software leading to these other areas. You got Michael Riconosciuto, who's making modifications. Allegedly, one of the places he does is the Cabazon Indian Reservation in Indio, California, which the Cabazon Indian tribe is like a few dozen people that pretty much kind of got taken over their land and was because it's sovereign land being used for casino gambling, like early on in the day. And, before that was a common thing. And apparently weapons testing was another place, in addition to making upgrades on the software. And when this tribe, I guess, decided, I guess, on who was going to help kind of develop their land or whatnot. There was a whole takeover that eventually ended with like multiple murders. Like I think there was, I want to say there was like 4 or 5 murders out there of people who objected to these people. There's another Nichols, John Philip Nichols, who would eventually be involved in working with the Cabazons, but also might have been like a government. He might have been CIA, whatnot. It's not related to Robert Booth Nichols in terms of anything I've come across, but it's another one that kind of figures into the octopus was never just one aspect of government operations. It was drug trafficking. It was, I'm sure, gun running. I mean, Casolaro basically said the octopus, what would make up the tentacles of the octopus started in like 1949 in like a CIA operation that went bad in Albania.
And that's just as far back as he'd looked so far.
Yeah, no, God only knows. It probably went back.
Because he, from what I understand, it had been about a year of really intense research for him up to the point of his death. So that's, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, for everything he uncovered, that's he could have been like Dave McGowan and just totally fucking tied it all the way back to the Roman Empire. Or something.
Oh God, yeah. Shit. I mean, it's bad men doing bad things. It's and there's a mission. I mean, there's a reason why they're doing it, but in the end, it's like it's only known to them. I think in the long run. But you want to know what the title of his book was?
Yeah, I do. Is it the fucking Behold a Pale Horse?
Behold a Pale Horse. Yep.
Which I found out today. I just listened to a couple podcasts to kind of freshen up on it. And I was like, are they talking about Bill Cooper? What the fuck? Because they said that he had, so all his documents were not in the hotel room at the time of his death.
They went missing.
And then he had a folded up piece of paper in one of his shoes that was from Behold a Pale Horse. So I got confused. And they said his book. I was like, so did he own a copy of Bill Cooper? So that he wrote that?
Yeah, Cooper's book came out the year Casolaro died.
So Casolaro, or did Cooper just have any idea, you think?
Could have just been could have just been a complete and total.
It's a cool name.
Crazy coincidence. It is a great name for a book. But, all of Casolaro's papers, which he took with him everywhere, went missing. And that's just.
Well, you know what it reminds me of, to harken back to the Franklin scandal? What was that private investigator who died in the plane crash? It reminds me of that, because he told his brother, if I'm going to fucking disappear, and I think Casolaro told his brother, I'm going down to West Virginia to talk to a source, and I might, if something happens to me, it's not an accident. It's very similar. There was
people that I think knew that he was going and possibly obtaining like actual physical evidence, like pictures and possible, like I think audio recordings.
Caradori.
Yes, and that's what I think is what made him not reach where he was going when he was coming back. If that happened, I think that's because from stuff that I had covered, it seemed like he had let a few people know prior. Oh, like this might be the shit right here.
Yeah.
You know how people are.
That's that one always bugged me. But yeah, with Casolaro, he said something. I'm going to bring back the head of the octopus. He had said that.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's no small statement.
Yeah, no. And again,
so far I've only been giving you tentacles, baby.
But again, a reason why you need to be careful with who you share your, information with, because he had no problem letting people know what he was working on.
Yeah,
but,
it's like he almost didn't grasp the risk that he was in.
but I think some people never really realize it's going to end like that. Nowadays, it's like, okay, so Caradori, private investigator, Danny Casolaro, kind of like freelance, writer, journalist. I mean, meanwhile, his book proposals hadn't gotten anywhere yet. He got some interest, but nothing that was firm. Who knows? With enough time, he could have had something huge, especially if he would have gotten backed by the right people. Then again, they could have also buried it and, just as quickly buried him. And, in the end, they just chose to bury him instead of trying to make the story, some sort of just fringe, book, be like, oh, you want to read this piece of crap? And, just kind of, I think every now and then there's books that come out that have conspiracy elements to them that have just enough truth, but is papered over by so much bizarre stuff that it becomes, no one will trust anything from it. But yeah, and they always try to say that's one of the reasons why they think he killed himself is like, oh, he was depressed that he wasn't getting the book deal and he was having money issues, and like people, point by point, like people would never have problems giving him money, letting him borrow money, that he was always good for it. His book was getting traction. It was just a case of I think he had an outline. He had an outline and he had some pages. He didn't have a full book yet because he hadn't completely proved what he wanted to prove yet. But
well, also, if you talk to his family and friends, they'll tell you that he was the most excited in his life he'd ever been. He felt like he was on the fucking break, and he was
no depression. Yeah,
but they also say he had MS. So he killed himself because he had early onset
MS. Yeah,
but he wasn't showing any signs of that yet. I almost wonder if they just made that shit up, because
I wouldn't be surprised if they did. And you almost wonder, like, well, since you completely, you embalmed him. I'm like, well, don't get me wrong. I mean, it's his head. I'm sure they found it in his head or whatnot. But it's like, who's to say that wasn't messed up because you pumped that shit in him already? So it's kind of tough to say on that. It's kind of like when. What was it? The boys on the tracks, how they,
right.
Oh yeah. The kids, 20 joints, they fell asleep on the tracks and whatever. It was the train. Okay. I'm going to go to someone else. Yeah. This guy was stabbed, 20 times and this one was beaten over the head. Oh, okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. That's a Clinton death count. One of the big ones for people
and also
who might not know that.
The Clinton medical examiner give you
people killing themselves from like shooting themselves in the back of the head.
Twice.
Yeah.
Double tap.
My favorite is the Jonathan Luna, the U.S. attorney who they found up in Baltimore.
Was he the guy hanging from the tree with the shotgun blast to the chest?
No, that was Mark Middleton. That was
there's so many good ones.
Yeah, no, Jonathan Luna was Baltimore U.S. attorney. He leaves in the middle of work, like he's late night working on a case, like a plea deal. Leaves from Baltimore, goes through. I think he winds up going through like Delaware, Jersey. He goes all the way up to New Jersey, then goes to PA. They find him in like Pennsylvania, like the Amish country, with about like 36 stab wounds with a penknife, and they said he killed himself. And it's
a little bit more excessive than 12 slashes to the wrist.
Yeah, well, and then one of the writers with Casolaro, they're like, oh, well, the 8, that was to represent the octopus. I'm like, well, it was 12 total. So I'm like, you're going to say 8 on one arm is the octopus, but then what about the other 4? Like that's a little bit, kind of hurts the symbolism argument you were hoping for. I'm like, then he just would have went for 8.
Yeah, but 4 times 2 divided by 8, it's an octopus, man.
Yeah, they try to, with Casolaro's death, they just try to say he got in over his head and he killed himself. I think he was running into guys who were really, Nichols alone threatened his life, at one point, because not only was he bouncing his ideas off of, he wasn't just like taking everything they said at face value. He was talking to Riconosciuto, he was talking to Nichols. He spoke to some FBI guys. He was speaking to a guy named Thomas Gates, who I believe was out of the LA FBI office, and he's like, you need to be careful with Nichols. He's like, he's connected to the Gambinos, he's connected to the Yakuza, and he might be an informant.
He probably had sex with Courtney Love at some point.
Well, hey, Courtney got passed around like the Duchy on the left-hand side.
I hear Yakuza twice in the same fucking month. I gotta go there.
Yeah, Courtney. So when Casolaro, I guess, kind of brought some of his findings to Nichols, Nichols said, yeah, you will, if you don't drop this, you will never get out of this case alive. Like, just kind of forewarned, and that was before, like, pretty imminently before Casolaro died. And, with so many aspects, like the octopus itself, him calling this case the octopus wasn't the first time that had been used for some sort of conspiracy. I believe Bobby Kennedy called MCA, the one-time talent agency, and then later on, like, entertainment behemoth, called it an octopus because it went from a talent agency to MCA Universal and was producing TV and all these other things, run by 2 guys who were mob connected. Lou Wasserman and Joel Stein, who were both out of Cleveland, who were mob connected.
Yo, you said Wasserman?
Yeah, Lou Wasserman is the guy's name. Yeah.
Interesting.
Is that any tie to Wasserman Schultz? in Florida?
Not that I'm aware of. Not that I'm aware of. I'll have to go back. It's interesting enough. I read a book, The Last Mogul, that was about Lou Wasserman, and Danny Casolaro comes up in it.
Octopus.
Yeah.
I just, you know where that caught my attention? And, it could just be totally nothing, but like there was Cicero's who were very much involved in the Golden Dawn at one point, and there's pretty good, like we almost covered it on the Occult Rejects, but we didn't. There was pretty much like good evidence of them being tied to mafia. And there was a James Wasserman who was big at one point in the OTO, and I'm like,
Yeah, I mean, Lou Wasserman was definitely an interesting guy. I think he only died within like the past 20 years or so. I think he lived pretty long, but was a guy who was, I mean, kind of like a thug himself, to a lot of ways. And I think their building was called the Black Tower. Like there was a lot of weird symbolism to like the Universal headquarters and whatnot. And let's face it, who came out of Universal? Spielberg and some other interesting movies and things like that. But so Bobby Kennedy had called MCA the Octopus, and then you had a whole aspect where in the 80s it got uncovered that they had some mob connected, if not mob guys in their organization who no one seemed to know who hired.
Yeah, he showed up one day and started working.
Yeah, well, they had a guy named Sal Pacello who was connected, I believe, to the Genovese family, and a guy named Eugene Giaquinto who was connected, I think might have been connected to Gotti. And Pacello only came up because there was an issue where MCA was connected to something going on with records. They called them cutouts, records that I guess were, I don't know if they were promotional or just something where they were sold at a discount to record stores from like a distributor. And at some point there was an issue where one guy basically was promised like top-notch records, was sold shit. He complained, they broke his face. And one of the guys connected was actually loosely the inspiration for one of the guys on The Sopranos.
Do you remember which guy?
What's up?
Do you remember which guy?
They said he one of the guys, even though he was Italian, would be part. They'd use him to be the inspiration for Hesh. The
Jewish dude.
Yeah, but it was really two guys. It was this guy, an Italian guy named Gaetano Corky was his middle name, nickname, Vastola, and a guy named Morris Levy. Morris Levy was more so Hesh's inspiration, but Morris Levy was definitely mob connected. But so some of these other guys, though, with MCA, that investigation, Casolaro would refer to that. Like he believed that MCA was part of that. Like entertainment figured into the entertainment mob connection figured into.
He had it all figured out. No fucking wonder.
Yeah, there's a lot of weird stuff. I mean, and I was just thinking earlier, I was like MCA, and I'm like, I know in the last Mogul book I saw Jack Valenti, and I'm like, if I hear Jack Valenti's name, I know what's his name, Corey Hughes, who's big into the JFK stuff, would be all over that because he's convinced that Valenti is the gunman in Dealey Plaza.
Grassy Knoll.
Yeah, he definitely believes that. I said I got to get his book. I paid for it. I'm waiting for him to finish it. But Valenti was definitely involved in some weird stuff. He was another guy who just kind of goes from Washington as one of Lyndon Johnson's guys. The next thing you know, he's like the head of the Motion Picture Association, and he's calling all the shots for, I mean, it's a huge role. It's not, people think it's just a lobbying thing. I think it's, it's really.
Well, they gave that role to China probably like 20 years ago.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we're pretty much giving everything to them anyway. Why not? But so I'm trying to think what else. So Riconosciuto had at one point testified about how the Justice Department stole Promise. And within about a year, he's arrested and charged with trafficking in meth. Yeah. I think he only just got out. He only got out in 2017. So he was in jail for like a good 20 plus years. And, he would talk every now and then about Danny Casolaro, but I think he would never go. I think like it was almost kind of like he was being cagey about it because, do you want to tell too much when,
Is there? Hey, he's like, hey, look what the fuck happened to him. Leave me alone.
Yeah, pretty much. So and Robert Booth Nichols would later on pop up in there was a guy named Sam Israel who ran a hedge fund, Bayou Capital. And at some point, I forget, I think it was actually like an actor who wasn't like a big time actor introduced him to Nichols. And there's even a little bit of a Tom Hanks connection because the guy who
fuck
Tom
Hanks,
the guy who introduces Israel to Nichols was in the movie Dragnet with Tom Hanks. And
that's the one with Dan Aykroyd, right?
Yep, it's a good movie too.
What the fuck?
Nichols kind of like, kind of wears his reputation like on his sleeve, but kind of like just goes with it because Nichols also had it had come out. It's actually the book I have right next to me, The Last Circle. That's about Danny Casolaro by a woman named Sherry Seymour who worked on that case for years.
Is that like if you had to say there's a definitive book about it, would that be the one?
Well, yeah, hers definitely is because she had written, there was like an online manuscript for years that was called The Last Circle, and it was under her like alias or whatnot, because I think she worked on stuff on the radical right. So I think she was like, kind of concerned about her life. And I had read it online, and it was like 8-9 chapters, and I was like, this is good, but then it just stops. And it was years later.
She was starting to hear clicks on her phone at night.
Probably, yeah.
I can't fucking keep writing this.
Trine Day, the publishing house, eventually published it. It was like 2010. And, I remember saying to my wife, I'm like, I got to get this book. I said, I'd read The Octopus like a couple times at this point, and I said, yeah, there's so much. I felt like there was so much more there. I mean, they're still finding stuff in terms of, what do you call it? The Freedom of Information requests on Casolaro's death, and that the FBI was still investigating it as of a handful of years ago. So there's definitely something there, but there's also, let's face it, corruption in the Justice Department, I'm sure.
They're investigating it to see what the fuck else he knew.
Yeah.
Like they're still going through those documents they took from that hotel room.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Where do those go? And how do you just be like, they're just not there? Yeah. There's in the book, there's even a picture of him a month before his death with the briefcase of documents. Which part of me wondered how anyone got that picture, but then again, maybe he was doing it for his own benefit. And, it's insane. A month later, they're gone, and they're like, oh, no, he just killed himself. Then where are the documents? It's not a simple solution when you think about it. But so Nichols befriends this guy, Israel, and one of the things that comes out about Nichols is that he has a alternative view in Dealey Plaza where the driver shoots Kennedy.
Oh, he's the one that came up with that?
Yeah, well, that had popped up in The Last Circle, the manuscript. And this guy, Israel, was kind of really interested. He's like, as he gets to know Nichols, he's like, can I see it? He's like, all right. So yeah, there's a copy because this is supposedly something Bill Cooper even mentioned in Behold a Pale Horse, was that the driver shot Kennedy. And, so there's a point where it's like,
seen that one.
Yeah, slows down and what was it?
Is that from that was like the copy from China or some shit like that? Where it has like a different angle, yeah. And you see
you could watch the Zapruder film and see Jackie do it. I'm not even fucking joking. You guys eat some mushrooms and watch the Zapruder film. Come back and full report due Monday.
It was, what was it? Bill Greer, the driver. They said, turned around and shot him or whatnot. But that Nichols had this. And so anyway, at some point, this guy, Israel's hedge fund collapses. And I think Nichols disappears. And then I think within 2008, 2009, Nichols is dead, or allegedly. And they find in a safe deposit box like a treasury note for like, it was like $250 million or something like that. Something like an insane amount. And I was like, there's no way this guy's dead. Just thinking of the way this guy was and just reputation and, it's definitely CIA connected. He's definitely, and then the whole Steven Seagal weirdness. And it's like, okay. And Seagal, who used to say he was CIA, and, there's just a lot of.
He's a CIA Russian sheriff.
Yeah. With Nichols, you really wonder, what was real, what was, bravado. But in terms of Casolaro, I said I think that's why he was bouncing things off. And Last Circle definitely goes into that a little more. That at some point Nichols and Riconosciuto had some sort of falling out.
And that woman that wrote that book is still alive.
Yeah, she's got to be up there now. I mean, she's even up there, like just looking at this cover from 2010. I think she even helped give some information to Wendy Painting, the one who wrote Aberration and the Real of the Heartland of the Real about McVeigh and about Oklahoma City.
Ooh, I should read that.
Well, like, that's a great book. But I think for when Wendy Painting, her next book is coming out, I think Sherry Seymour gave her some of her work or something like that.
She's getting up there.
Yeah, definitely up there. But, it's an excellent book. But yeah, no, with Casolaro's case, it's just like everything that comes out. I think it's Muck Rock is one of the websites that does a lot of Freedom of Information requests. If I type in Casolaro's name and there's something new, I'm like, all right, what do we got? Give me something new here. If there's reason, if it's in the reasons to doubt it, the case, I'm like, well, okay, that we kind of already know. It's like, this is a guy who would not have, put his family through that with the sister that died of a drug overdose young and, just to experience stuff like that, wasn't that type of person. Then, let's go to the other thing, his funeral.
Where the military guy showed up?
Yeah, the military guy shows up and salutes. Like, that's, and then later on...
Puts a little medal on his coffin.
Yep, and everyone's asking his mom, who was that? No idea.
Yeah, I thought you knew him.
Yeah, that becomes like one of the biggest mysteries. When they showed that on Unsolved Mysteries and whatnot, and it's like... I
was hoping you were going to mention that because I listened to the audio of it today.
Yeah.
It was pretty fucking good.
Yeah, wasn't bad at all. I said, because don't get me wrong, Unsolved Mysteries is good, could be very cheesy, but...
Yeah, but I was expecting that, and they actually gave me more stuff I didn't know.
Yeah,
than the other podcasts I listened to today.
I think with Netflix, with the new Unsolved they're doing, they should do some of those revisiting some of the old cases. Because
they won't.
No. Well, because it's Netflix. Netflix doesn't dive into conspiracies.
Yeah, it's fucking Edward Bernays' nephew.
I still remember reading the book about the creation of Netflix and the guy admitting it, and I was like,
I don't think he's attached to it anymore, but he set it up to be what it is before he left.
Yep. Yeah, and it all started supposedly over, what was it? I think they said they developed it because overdue Apollo 13 was how they came to
another fucking Tom Hanks connection, goddammit.
Yeah, there you go. I'm telling you. But yeah, with, this case has always interested me. And, every now and then it'll come up in a conspiracy book or things like that. It's so much more, it's a microcosm of conspiracy. Like conspiracy theory and what can happen, when the forces,
It sounds like a movie you would have watched in the 90s.
Yeah.
It's everything's there.
Well, they wanted to do a movie. There was talk that like Timothy Hutton back in the day was going to play him. There was going to be a movie about that. And
the dude from Animal House?
No, you think Tim Matheson, I think maybe you're thinking of.
Okay.
Timothy Hutton was in Ordinary People. He was more like...
I know who you're talking about.
He was on a good show years ago, Leverage. It was a really good show, but then he actually got bounced when they did the reboot because there was some rape accusation from like the early 80s. So they dropped him, even though nothing's ever come out of it. But it's good enough to be like, you're canceled, And
he was the Aziz Ansari of his time.
And Casolaro's nephew did a play. Like an off-Broadway play called Danny Casolaro Died for You. And it's supposed to be about like Casolaro, Nichols, and Riconosciuto.
He's still alive?
Yeah, the nephew's still alive. And
wow, that's fucking ballsy.
Yeah, I think that they were set to I think movie rights have been bought, but it'll never be made. It's one of those stories like you think,
wait a minute, it's going to come out on the Daily Wire. It's gonna have Gina Carano is gonna play Danny Casolaro.
They'll bury it. I doubt it would see the light of day, which is unfortunate. I would see it.
So do you think just Charlie Robinson with his octopus book? Do you think that was an inspiration? I think we might have talked about this actually.
He mentioned it. He definitely did, and he's like, because every now and then people will mention Danny Casolaro and but some will be, quickly in passing. He's mentioned it. He said, yeah, but people wanted to be able to look into what he did, but not die at 44 years of age, and it's like, yeah, no, it's a legitimate point. But
that's like we're all hovering around that age, all three of us right now.
Well, and by the way, if we were talking, symbolism with, we were talking to Cheney and 47, he was born in 47.
Oh,
that whole, and there's some UFO shit connected to a degree with Casolaro's, like,
Really?
Riconosciuto's father. And Riconosciuto knew a guy named Fred Chrisman. Fred Chrisman figures into the Maury Island UFO incident in the Northwest, and Fred Chrisman would later on be subpoenaed by Jim Garrison in his JFK investigation. Yeah, there's a lot of weirdness to that.
Do you know what was really going on with that thing? What was that? Sorry, say that name again.
What, Maury Island?
Yeah. I don't mean to put you on the spot. Like, if you do.
No. I mean, that one, UFOs do interest me. And it's like, especially, that was the year, I think it was right around the time with Kenneth Arnold, the guy who was, I think, in the Air Force and had seen UFOs. I think Chrisman might have been part con man, but I think he was one of those guys who, he might have been maybe even an early Man in Black type of guy, but it's tough to tell. Like, in the end, I think towards the end of his life, he was like an Art Bell, like an early Art Bell, like a radio host and whatnot, getting into weird stuff like that. But I think people even put him at one point as one of the tramps that they pulled off in the train yard in Dealey Plaza. But yeah, Maury Island, I don't know. There's just another one of those weird sort of things where it's like possible. I mean, with UFO stuff, I never believed too much, but I never disbelieved too much. I'm willing to kind of willing to listen and kind of see where it, leads. But yeah, some people are just like, it's shit's out there, but then again, I say that, and then the person's like, well, I'm telling you the truth. And it's like, I don't know, show me something. Like, I don't know, like in the end, it could be just back and forth of,
Sometimes the only reason why I ask is sometimes I do think there's occultism behind UFO stories. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, there is. I mean, it's all ties back to Werner von Braun and Jack Parsons and Mr. Crowley.
I mean, I was going to say like Blavatsky's. Like, people rip off her a lot with aliens. And like, I always
forget about her.
Yeah, that's like a huge. Honestly, in my opinion, I think that's a huge problem. Not that like you forgetting about it, but people not knowing really, because I think no. I do think she's influenced so much more in the UFO community than people would even understand, because they have no idea what the fuck type of shit she was talking about or into.
Well, she was tied to Crowley, right? Like
they knew each other, and he had actually high regards for her. He considered her like, I think, an 8-3 or something in the AA, even though he says she wasn't in it. He gave her a pretty high ranking, or like 7th degree or 8th degree. That was, she knew her shit at that point, kind of. He normally wasn't like the nicest towards women, so
Never.
he spoke highly of her. Just put it that way.
Yeah, no. So some of those guys are interesting and.
Yeah, no, that's why I asked. I was just wondering if there might have been like a story that I was like, oh, that sounds.
Yeah,
like
no. And to be honest, I want to read more. What's his name? Ken Thomas had a book about, I think, UFOs and JFK, and I think might have even hit a little bit on some of the stuff with the octopus that hadn't already been said, and Chrisman figures into that story. But yeah, I'm still kind of like that, agnostic when it comes to that story, at least. But UFOs are always, to me, interesting in a lot of ways. And Casolaro,
even if it's just for entertainment.
Yeah. And I think even they said, part of the stuff that Casolaro had gotten into might have been government technology, and might have even been Roswell, might have even popped up in there. He had so many different areas of interest that, to be honest, these guys were all, it wasn't just like, one guy, one branch of service, things like that. I mean, he had reached out to Howard Hunt, but not just the Watergate burglar. I mean, Howard Hunt was CIA, I think, till the day, pretty much to the day they threw him aside for Watergate. He was CIA, a guy who had been all over the world, and Kennedy connected, and so many other things, and I think he was just like reaching the tip, not even the tip of the iceberg, but kind of like he was just reaching like a peak of knowledge that was probably going to spread out and lead to more things at that point. But he might have been able to find out at least the promise, found out who eventually, kind of was the point person on that. But in the end, it's still speculated on what got him killed. Was it promise? Was it October surprise? Was it Iran Contra? Did he find, I think one of the things was that he might have found like an account number, for someone who was, maybe they didn't want to know, was getting money or something towards that effect. I think, I think he had found some stuff, the Adnan Khashoggi's, the gun runner, he was a well-off arms dealer. But
no, that's he's related to that guy that walked
Jamal
into
Khashoggi. Yeah, the journalist, the one who got killed. Yep. Yeah, he was, and I think he was also related to Fayed, Dodi Al Fayed, Princess Di's.
Oh shit!
Yeah, I
God
believe
damn it.
so. I remember reading that correctly, because actually so the original Octopus book by Keith and Ken Thomas came out in '96. They Ken Thomas updated it in, I think it was like 2002, 2003. I got it in like 2004, but they talk about Princess Diana and kind of like the continuation of the operations of the Octopus, whether they call it the Octopus. There was another group that I read, it was called the K Team. Like there was just like certain like ways to describe this group. Maybe the Enterprise, which was the one that was Iran Contra was their name. I mean, who knows? I mean, there's just so many, you can call it the deep state, but in the end, they probably go by so many different names. And I think they almost function kind of like, there's that great line in JFK where Garrison's talking to X and talking about, who could have fired the shot. And he's like, well, so many gunmen, maybe one's got the real bullet. And then in the end, no one's, everybody's guilty, because in the end, you don't know who fired the shot. You just kind of go by, well, I fired, and then, there you go. Like everyone in the end could be part of this group, but never really know truly what their name is, because they go by so many different ways. They operate through, just almost kind of like, in the shadows, but maybe, not completely in the shadows.
The least ranking among them is the one who has to like step into the light a little bit.
Yeah, well, like when they say, like, I mean, one of the things I had read was, it's not the Secretary of Defense who has power. It's like the deputy, like it's someone who's like a couple steps below, who maybe never. That's why like someone like Paul Wolfowitz in the Bush administration is like, well, he wasn't Secretary of Defense, but he was like a couple steps below.
He got his dick wet.
Yeah. You get these guys in, and they kind of, it becomes like when we're talking about how these guys keep popping back up again. There was the story about, and I mentioned Hughes earlier, but Howard Hughes, when Howard Hughes took over the casinos in, he bought like a bunch of casinos in Vegas, and they're like, oh, Howard Hughes kicked the mob out, drain the swamp in Vegas. And they're like, well, I'll tell you, if he did, then the guys who were there the day before he got there were the guys who were there the day he left. Like they never left. They just maybe had different jobs.
Oh, and there's a lot of Mormon ties with both Vegas and Howard Hughes too.
Yeah. Well, and his second in command. So before the Mormons took complete control,
They're everywhere.
his second in command was Robert Mayhew. And Robert Mayhew comes up in the Octopus book. I actually believe he might.
Everything fucking just goes back to Casolaro, dude.
Robert Mayhew was former FBI and had CIA connections. And Lisa Pease, in her book, Lie Too Big to Fail, about Bobby Kennedy's assassination, points the finger at Mayhew as being behind Bobby's assassination. And Mayhew never met Hughes. Like they basically corresponded with notes, passed between the Mormons or whatnot, and phone calls. He never met Hughes face to face. And Mayhew was also the point person for the initial plot to kill Castro that involved the mafia. And yeah, Mayhew pops up later on in the Octopus at some point. I forget exactly when, but his name is definitely thrown about, and he's connected to other, I think actually like a weapons manufacturing company at one point. And it's just like, some people never really quit doing what they're doing, especially if it's, lucrative. And, Mayhew basically had his own spy organization.
Well, and as you age, you could kind of like do the Dick Cheney thing where you just like wait.
Yep.
And then when your time comes, there you are.
Dick Cheney. When they showed that, what was it? The Dems, what was it, with the January 6th anniversary, crossing the aisle to shake Dick Cheney's hand? I'm like, yeah, you saw cool at that point.
In 2006, if you told us that was going to happen, be like, no fucking way.
Nope.
George Bush is going to share chewing gum with Michelle Obama. Are you fucking serious?
Yeah, that was.
Or no, it was chapstick. That's even a little more intimate than chewing gum.
Oh,
it's like kissing almost.
Yeah. Oh my god. Yeah, no, that's creepy shit.
It was like
So
that could have been foreplay.
like if you want to tie this up in a nice bundle, like what is your takeaway from all of this, and like anything you want to just close with?
I think that elements of the Octopus are still there. I mean, I don't think these guys, I think, okay, they die out, but I think there's always the next generation. If you ever want to look at something that's really interesting, I don't know how deep they buried it on the internet, it was like a 24-part series by a guy named J. Orland Grad, who I believe was like a financial like wizard, real smart guy. And it was about kind of what happened with Promise. And
J. Orland,
Grabbe, Grad, and talks about the connections between Promise and Vince Foster.
Is that who your Twitter handle's named after?
Well, I picked it. It was weird. So when I was in college, back when we had instant messenger, when you could talk to someone upstairs as opposed to getting off your ass and going to see that person, instant messenger. And so I asked one of my friends, like, what do you want to go as? And I'm like, I didn't want to go as my name. So I'm like, Vince Foster. We don't have Vince. We can go with Vic. And I'm like, all right.
I knew it was because your fascination with Vince Foster. So everybody out there, if you want to check him out on Twitter, it's at Vic Foster, which
I think I have his
Vince
Twitter
Foster.
handle in there actually.
Oh, sweet. Anyway, keep going. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah,
But
no, it's all good. So yeah, no, that's like illuminating in that there was, just so much more to the financial aspect of Promise and how it's developed over time, not just being a tool of espionage, but being used to track financial transactions to such a degree, but that at some point, maybe even Vince Foster knew a great deal about it. And at some point, someone got access to Vince Foster's account and stole a great deal of money. And that
are you trying to tie it to the Clinton body count here?
It might actually lead to that, to a degree. I mean, there's weird aspects to it. The fact that, people talk about Bill Colby, the former CIA director.
That's who I'm named after, by the way.
And very nice. And now Colby figures into the Franklin scandal because at one point he was approached to be.
Yeah, he ended up dead in water too, that motherfucker.
And
three water deaths in one episode.
Some said he was working for it was called like strategic something. It was like some sort of investment financial newsletter. And some said that they were looking into Foster's death and Colby being involved. Some also said with Colby's death, it had to do with the old family jewels thing back in the 70s and, him kind of revealing.
I mean, Franklin scandal too. Like he hooked up with, what's the dude's name? The guy that they were friends in Vietnam. He's the guy that did
DeCamp. John DeCamp. Yep.
Yeah.
So, with that kind of always was interesting with that. But with Casolaro's death, and Promise, and I think with Promise, there's still variations out there. I mean, I think people have even tried connecting Promise with certain aspects of 9/11. And with the,
I think Peter Thiel has taken elements of Promise, like Palantir, and that kind of stuff. He's doing this software now that is like fucking Skynet, basically.
I wouldn't be surprised.
And he used to work with Elon Musk. Like they supposedly had a falling out over the PayPal thing, but Palantir is Promise for the internet age.
Yeah, Thiel is interesting, definitely for sure. But I think I had come across the further adventures, if you will, of promise, in Mike Rupert's Crossing the Rubicon, which is excellent book. And I know not everybody sees eye to eye on Rupert with his 9/11, theories, but it was a good book. And when he mentioned
does he buy the official narrative or something?
No. But because I remember reading his book after reading Daniel Hopsicker's Welcome to Terrorland, which was about, like talking about the hijackers in Florida and things like that. And Rupert believes it's like that, that the hijackers never were, and, that they, people like Barbara Olson faked their death and, things like that. And
you're making me want to read his book.
It was a good book. Well, Rupert was a guest on Joe Rogan's every now and then. Rupert killed himself in 2014.
But did he?
He's, from what they were saying, now again,
did he slash his wrist 12 times?
No, shot himself, left notes and everything for people and shot himself. Sad because, when he was here, after he came out with Crossing the Rubicon, within a couple of years, some BS thing up in Oregon where he was living led him to like leaving the country. And I think he survived like a poisoning attempt or whatnot. And then they interviewed him because he was former LAPD, and he was apparently approached by the CIA to take on a role while he was LAPD to like be like a cutout with the CIA, because I think his family was connected. And he was the one who, when John Deutsch, the CIA director, went to I think it was Watts or Compton to face a town hall in about the Dark Alliance story. And they were denying the CIA's involvement in drug trafficking. And he's like, I was LAPD, and I can tell you the CIA has been trafficking drugs for a long, long time. And the people went apeshit. And he gives operations where they specifically did it. And then Deutsch is like, well, you can just, let us know and we'll take care of it. And, he kind of got infamy from that, but then wrote about 9/11. And then they interviewed him, a couple guys, about the CIA stuff, and he's like, I'm not really into that. And he started talking about peak oil. He got into that and about the collapse of society from there, and they did a documentary about that. And it was actually pretty good, but you could already start to tell he was kind of changing to a certain, and he wound up being, they interviewed him for Vice.
After like it was taken over by Disney, or back in the OG days?
I think it was like in the late, it was like in the 2010s. It was actually, I think, a year or so before he died. And it was called like Apocalypse Man, like Apocalypse,
So
Man.
that might have been like when, what's his name? The guy everybody thinks is racist. Oh.
That's out there.
No,
that's so like everybody.
It was founded by, God, why can't I think of it? It was Gavin McGinnis.
Oh, okay.
So like him and this liberal dude started Vice, but if you were watching Vice back then, it was good shit. Now it's
they had some good stuff, but yeah, I think it became a multi-part. I think I watched it online where it was with them interviewing Rupert, and at this point his hair was long. I mean, he didn't even have that much hair on the top, so he was kind of like growing it out. And I said,
looked like the Crypt Keeper.
He didn't look good. And then when I read that he died, I was like, oh shit. And then suicide, but he was like, he left notes and what to do with his dog and like all these other things. He had just reported.
CIA is getting better at covering their tracks. It's like, if he was really going to kill himself, he's got a dog. Let's put that in a note.
Well, he did his own like radio show or something like that. I think it was called like the Lifeboat Hour or something like that.
It's like the dude in Twin Peaks, the reboot. He's got his own podcast.
Oh yeah, I know. Dr. Jacoby with the
with the golden shovel.
Yep. Time to shovel your shit. Yeah, that
wow.
Was cool. I like that
the fact that we all three know about that says something about us.
Oh, I love Twin Peaks.
I love Twin Peaks. Yep.
Nice.
Good.
Nice. Yo, you're into them too. You're into that stuff too, Colby. Twin Peaks.
Dude, David Lynch is probably like top 10 filmmakers for me.
Oh, we should do a Twin Peaks show one day.
I still have to listen to yours, but yeah, dude.
Mine are like real.
I'd rather digest Mulholland Drive. That's my favorite David Lynch.
I have that. I could watch that. I have it on my computer.
All right. Well, all right, dude, Phil. I don't know if you want to wrap up more, but I just got to say you've got like a fucking octopi of a brain, not just octopus. You got more than 8 tentacles, and the way you just I try to do what you do sometime, and I'm like fucking names, and I don't know.
Yeah.
You don't do a lot of
couldn't.
drugs. That's probably you probably got an edge up on me.
I try not to, but I'm not saying that's for the best. You know, it depends.
What is in a name?
I wouldn't have been able to do that without notes.
No, yeah.
Like
I mean, you want to close out anymore? Or you want to wrap?
Yeah, I mean, I'm good. I mean, with something like this, I'm always good to read more. I think still as time goes on, we will probably find out more about this story, but in the end, it'll be something like JFK, where like there'll always be files being held back. I mean, the FBI was still holding files back, and it's like at this point, another one of those cases where a lot of these guys are probably dead. So what public interest are we talking about? But I think our government's starting to get more like the British government, where they put things away for 75 years or 100 years, and then they hope you'll forget about it. And Danny Casolaro, him, Caradori, or someone like some will say Gary Webb.
I would say Gary.
Michael Hastings.
Yes.
I mean, what's to say that won't happen? And just because every now and then,
Isaac Cappy, I'm gonna throw him in there.
Yeah. Hey, when there was the line with in JFK, when they can kill a president, what makes them think they would not do something to little old me? And it's like, well, when you kind of cross the Rubicon, when you cross that point, when you're not the point where everybody's listening to you, but some people are listening to you and the wrong people are paying attention to you. That
what you mean by that. Yeah.
Could be anything else. So
I want to use that opportunity to plug my next episode on Conspiracy Plaid Time, because you showed her comment. Brandy Renee, we recorded an episode a couple of weeks ago talking about like how they are infiltrating like smaller people to like reach all of us and brainwash all of us. And like, yeah, it doesn't, just because you're a small nobody doesn't mean you're untouchable.
Yeah.
Like, we're all doing this right now. And I don't know. I think talking about certain things, like,
well, I
don't know. Apparently,
even...
a fucking Franklin scandal's still off limits, and that was like years ago.
I mean, I even think this type of stuff has become so prevalent in the last 3-4 years because of COVID. You'd have to be silly to not think that the government isn't going to jump in on it too, or magicians trying to make a buck, Yeah. So. Did you want to? I know you don't have your own show. Do you want to plug anything? You want like your Twitter? You have really. I think I put up a blog that you might have had on your page.
I do have like a book blog, when every now and then. I mean, my main thing besides my normal job, which is boring enough, I don't want to talk about it. But my book reviewing stuff, I said, I have a blog, but I also book review for like a bunch of different organizations. So, but the book blog's good because that's every now and then I can do conspiracy ones, which is good. So.
Okay, yeah, I have that, and I have your Twitter in the show notes.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course, of course. And Colby, you want to plug your stuff again one more time?
ConspiracyPlaytime.com. Look for Disinfobation on Rumble or Spotify.
Nice. And yes.
And you too, sir.
That's right. Yes, I have the NY Patriot Show and the Occult Rejects, and both on Rumble, BitChute, and YouTube, and all major podcast hosts. Thank you very much for basically doing the whole show for me there, Colby.
I thought you were going to say to Phil.
Well, no, I mean, besides him, you brought the guest on, and you were like really the only thing that person who added to it besides him. So it's just like
I disagree.
I was looking, I was like, damn, like this wasn't even my show.
I disagree.
No, I thought that shit was great.
It was a trifecta.
Oh yeah, no, but that was great. That was so much stuff. I'd really be interested in hearing you talk about the mafia, so we'll have to get together again.
All right, sounds good.
Yeah, thank you both very much. Thank you, everybody, for jumping in the chat. There was a bunch of yous here, and there was a bunch of people that I don't think I've really noticed or, looks kind of new. That's what's up. Thank you. Thanks for jumping in and checking out
CIA agents.
the show. Yeah, right. Oh, I doubt it. Yeah, thank you all. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.